Hello and welcome to a brand new series of Cujo Sound. This is my Wwise series. It's going to be kind of like my Unity series where we're going to approach Wwise from a sound designer's perspective. Like instead of having it explained by all sorts of random people, we're going to have it explained by me and how I would use it. One of the reasons for that is that for many years in the beginning of my career, I was wondering when I created various objects in Wwise or Fmod or other tools, then how that may be the way to do it, and that may be the way I would do it. But then I was always thinking, the pros, they must have some secrets. They must have some sort of tool that they can do this with, which is different because it felt too easy. But it is kind of like that. So let's get to it. And this here is all going to be done in Wwise. We're going to be making footsteps, and we're going to be doing it in as many ways as possible. I will take into account let's make a note of, that I expect viewers, if you want to learn something from this, that you understand how an engine works, and that you understand how to send a signal from an engine to Wwise, because we're only going to be approaching this from the Wwise side of things. So when I speak of parameters, RTPCs, and events, and so on coming in, we're not going to be dealing with how to do that from the engine. We're only going to be dealing with what we can do with them in Wwise, and that's how it goes. Let's start off with getting a bit of introduction to Wwise and how Wwise works in general. This here is the Wwise working environment. I like to have it pretty bare bone as it is right now. I usually have my meter over here so that I can check what kind of level I'm working at. And I like to have my audio over here and my events over here. Over here in events, you can make whatever kind of event you want, and you can have it trigger basically whatever you want over here. So let's get to it. In this case, we're just going to be creating some very, very basic footsteps out of a simple event and have a random container do it for us. And then we're going to move on from there. So I have in here, I have a folder called boots, and inside it, I have all these boots, these various samples that I've made, which are just footsteps on very basic material. Let's start off by doing it like this. If we drag and drop these into our default work unit over here, it'll ask us where to create them. We'll just import them like these. Here we go. So if we press play, and you do that by pressing space, or you click down here. These are all quite ordinary. Now, if we want to randomize between all these, we can select them all and right click and say, create parent, and create a random container. Now let's call this one for boots. Now if we press play on the random container, it will randomize between all the samples that are inside it. So that's how that goes. So from your engine, you might have an event coming in. Let's say you have some animations, or if your game is 2D or whatever, you will have some sort of way of triggering when the character is actually taking a step. And regardless of if you do it yourself or if you need some kind of programming help to do so, you will over here need to create an event. I may say so from the very beginning that please take into account that naming convention is kind of important in this matter. Some like to have play underscore and then the name of the event. In this case, we could just call it footsteps, or we could call it FS, or we could also call it FS underscore boots. Some like to have them footsteps underscore play. Some like to do it like that. It's just really important to keep track of how you deal with these and get a steady naming convention going, because if you mess this up, then once your project becomes kind of just bigger than just a couple of events, then it becomes really confusing to mess up with, to fool around with. So let's make one here that's called play underscore FS, and that's what we're going to do. Now this here is our event, and in the event we can tell what happens whenever this event is triggered. So we basically just drag and drop our boots container over here. which means that once we press play on the event here, as you can see, the event is selected down here in the transport. When you press play, it triggers this event, and that means that it triggers this random container. So we have a guy walking here. With a random container like this, we can set up various sorts of randomization going on, so that this, even though we have 8 samples here that play individually, and once we trigger the play event properly over here, it still sounds like the character is actually walking. But let's say we want more variation than this. In our random container here, we can set, let's say, the pitch. If you click this tiny little, I call it the tennis ball, but it is the randomization button. You double click it. If you enable it, you can set the minimum and maximum offset relative to whatever main pitch you set in here. So let's say we, to begin with, start with disabling this, and then press like this. Yeah, this is just basic pitch control. So if we start off with the relative value of 0, and we then say enable pitch, randomization of pitch, and then say, well, let's say just 250 and plus 250. Then here we go. We can even do it even further than that. Let's say minus 500 and 500. Here at 500, you start to notice the pitch changes in randomization, and pitch randomization can be a huge immersion breaker, if you ask me. So it's really important that you keep it as subtle as possible, if you ask me. It starts to become like the sound, which may, from the beginning, be very natural, sounding very, very cool. Then the changes in the randomization become too big. I mean, it can literally go from minus 500 to 500 on the next one, which means that the change becomes too audible, and we don't want that. So I usually go with very subtle changes. If we had some sort of drunk parameter, which would just only choose a random number, but could then only choose the next random number within a given offset between that, then it would have been better. But let's stick to what we have. And that's randomization of the pitch. In here, with play type, you can also select how it should randomize. I honestly don't know the difference between standard and shuffle. I think it shuffles the order to begin with and then randomizes, and the other one just randomizes between the order that you have set. Yeah, but you can set it to avoid repeating the last one, so that you never have 2 identical samples right after each other. Normally I would increase that number. Let's say in this case where we have 8 samples, we might go with 5. Yeah. Yep. And you can randomize every other parameter as well. The low pass, the high pass, and things like that. I mean, you can sort of do that. I mean, with max offset 100, you can tell it randomizes quite a lot between them. So we don't want that. Let's say we just want it to go to 10 and minus 10, and we want this value here to be 10. Then we have a max low pass filter cutoff at 20, and we have a minimum of 0. This just adds very subtle changes to the sound itself, but it helps increase the randomization process, which is the whole point of the random container, if you ask me. Because just randomizing between the samples themselves, sure you can do that, but I find it kind of boring to work with. I mean, this is also part of the creative process, depending on how you want stuff to sound in the end. And that's it, basically, for random containers. Let's move on to another kind of footsteps in the next video and try and do the same sounding footsteps, but in a completely different way. See you next time.